Did an election that was supposed to revolve around women's issues actually come down to the plight of men, young men? The 2024 race long ago turned into the boys versus girls election, with polls showing Harris performing significantly better among women and Trump among men. But the question was, how big will the gender gap actually be? Well, we all know now it was big enough to hand Donald Trump the presidency. More than half of the male vote nationwide, 55%, went to Trump, 42% to Harris. Men under 30 saw a dramatic shift from supporting Democrats in 2020 by a 15 percentage point margin to swinging back to the GOP by 13 points. A CNN exit poll also found men under 30 in Pennsylvania favored Trump by 21 points. In 2020, Biden won that same group by 9 points. A part of President-elect Donald Trump's campaign strategy involved using hypermasculine voices like Hulk Hogan and Kid Rock, UFC CEO Dana White. Democrats may have miscalculated the strength and importance in appealing to men. On their party's website, under the headline, "Who We Serve," Democrats showed a diverse list of minority groups, including LGBTQ+, Americans with disabilities, Pacific Islanders, Native Americans, women, many other communities. No mention of men. You might remember back in August, I noted this, made reference to the omission in a conversation that I had with Professor Scott Galloway.
The Democratic Party right now, Michael, is facing the same issues as some of the DEI apparatus at universities. And that is when you are purposely and explicitly advocating for 76% of the population, are you advocating for them, or are you discriminating against the 24%? And that's how I think a lot of young men feel. Quite frankly, they just don't feel seen by the Democratic Party.
In the final months of the election, Donald Trump reached out to young male voters on popular platforms that they subscribe to. His campaign even consulted Trump's youngest son, Barron, on where to find this audience. Trump did lengthy interviews with Joe Rogan, Theo Von, Logan Paul, bussin' with the boys on Barstool, Aiden Ross. He played golf with YouTube pranksters known as the Nelk Boys. His 3-hour interview with Joe Rogan last month reached 55 million listeners and resulted in Rogan's late endorsement for Trump on election eve. After clinching the presidency early Wednesday morning, Trump and his family and his campaign surrogates took to the stage to thank their supporters. UFC CEO Dana White gave a personal shout out to the manosphere.
I want to thank some people real quick. I want to thank the Nelk Boys, Aiden Ross, Theo Von, bussin' with the boys, and last but not least, the mighty and powerful Joe Rogan.
Joining me now is NYU Business School professor Scott Galloway. He's the host of the podcast Professor G. Great to have you back. We've all heard of toxic masculinity. What is aspirational masculinity?
Good to be with you, Michael. Aspirational, feeling good about being a man, believing you are entitled to more economic opportunity than is currently presented. Look, you referenced this, so I feel like most of the stats I was going to discuss, you've already kind of stolen my thunder. But essentially, this was supposed to be the election, the referendum on bodily autonomy. This was the testosterone election. Look at who Trump went on. Look at who and what he went all in on. Crypto, Elon Musk, rockets, cars. You talk about podcasts. There's a difference between being right and being effective. Whether we can discuss whether his policies are right or not, but gosh, talk about effective. That number you mentioned, a total of 55 million people listen to or watch the Rogan podcast. The average age is 34, skews male. Just to talk about broadcast television, some of the best shows on MSNBC, seen as a left kind of leaning network, get 1 million viewers and the average age is 70 and it skews female. So what would be more effective? 1 million 70-year-old women or 55 million 34-year-old men in your state, the swingiest of swing states? Young men were 9 points towards Biden in 2020 and then 18 points toward Trump in 24. That's a tectonic shift. And it all comes down, in my opinion, to the same thing. A 30-year-old man or woman isn't doing as well as his or her parents were at 30 for the first time in America's history. And if your son isn't in a relationship, can't afford to buy a home, is anxious, is depressed, are the rights of Palestinians, territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, or trans rights, does that even register on your screen? This was the testosterone podcast election.
I want to say that you've spoken of these issues. We've spoken of these issues before there was a 2024 campaign. And I can remember having conversations with Scott Galloway going back 2 or 3 years, some of them here on CNN, some of them on Sirius XM, wondering why, and I wasn't thinking Donald Trump, but why doesn't someone champion this cause? And really, he was the first to step forward and do so.
He flew right into the storm, and he embraced the manosphere. He talked about the need, crypto, right? What is more ground zero for kind of young men and economic opportunity, whether you believe that or not, than crypto? And let's look at some of the stats. 40 years ago, the average age of the first-time homebuyer was 36. Today, it's 54. Pre-pandemic, the average home was $290,000. Post-pandemic, it's $420. With an acceleration in interest rates, you're looking at the average mortgage has gone from $1,100 to $2,200. 40 years ago, 2/3 of people under the age of 30 had a home. 60% had a child. Have all of a sudden young people opted out of having a home and a child, or maybe they just can't afford it? And unfortunately, the Democrats weren't able to square the circle of the fact that the economy is actually quite good, and some of Trump's policies, whether it be deficit spending or tariffs, will likely result in more inflation and greater interest rates and taxation on the young, but they weren't able to communicate that. In the podcast medium can't be understated here, Michael, because some of the offensive things that we Democrats thought that joke is offensive, the zeitgeist in podcasts is it softens people. Podcast hosts aren't looking for a gotcha moment. They generally want to present the individual in their best light. And it's more got the vibe of, can't you take a joke? And if you look at the 9 of the top 10 podcasts, 8 of they lean right, and Trump went on 6 of them. There's going to be a lot of forensics here, but not acknowledging the struggles of young men as a broader theme will be a very big issue when we look at the autopsy of the failed Harris campaign. And also, simply put, she should have gone on a plane to Austin. The demographic group that swung most violently towards Trump was young people. The second most violent swing was their parents, age 45 to 64. All of the social engineering, all of the righteous social issues didn't even take a back seat. They weren't even in the car, because what people see is their kids not doing well, specifically young men, and Trump went right into this issue.
I want to display what you're describing. Put up the Edison Research exit survey data. This was published by the Washington Post. I don't know if Scott can see it, but it shows that among 18 to 29-year-olds, she had the edge. But as we've documented, he gained significantly among young men. But now look at the 45 to 64 category. It was the best category for Donald Trump. You just made reference to this, but who are those people as they relate to young men?
I hear from them every day, Michael. When I started talking about the struggles of young men 3 or 4 years ago, there was a gag reflex. I understood it because a lot of people who entered that void were, quite frankly, thinly veiled misogynists. The conversation has shifted, and the people driving this conversation and the most emails, or the demographic I get the most emails from, are the following: single mothers worried about their sons. Are you focused on international affairs or the rights of special interest group when your son, my daughter's in Pennsylvania at Penn, my other daughter's in PR in Chicago, and my son is in the basement vaping and playing video games, and you want me to worry about Ukraine? You want me to have empathy for this zombie apocalypse on campuses, which is seen as very democratic? No, I want my kid out of my house, and I want him to have the same opportunities my generation had. The second biggest swing here, or the portion of the female vote that swung most aggressively away from Harris and towards Trump, was one demographic: mothers.
You're entitled to this victory lap because you've been saying it here. I've been thrilled to give you the platform to say it for years. Thank you, Professor G.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for being first and unafraid to talk about this issue. America is a platform, wonderful rights, wonderful freedoms, directly linked to economics. And I think the Democrats need to re-embrace their strength, which is better markets under Democrats and giving young people more hope. That is what America is about. And Democrats have actually been pretty good at it. They just haven't been able to communicate it. But again, thank you for bringing this up early and often.
Scott Galloway, let's see now what some of you are saying on social media quickly, because I know we're way over. That's all right. It was worthy. It was not just the male vote, but the non-college graduate male vote, as there was a 40-plus point gap against college-educated female voters. When you put together, Darrell, I'll just say quickly, when you put together both education and gender, that's when you see the most significant divide. Non-college educated men, college-educated women, being so precise with my wording because I don't want to be perceived as negative. I certainly would never be. I know a lot of street-smart guys who didn't complete a degree, more so than some of the Ivy League types. I want to remind you, go to my website at Smerconish.com. Here's today's poll question. Has Donald Trump changed America or revealed it? Catherine, do I have time to put up that one graph on the screen? This comes from Carlos Lozada. If you're wondering, what the hell is that poll question about? Can I read that one graph out loud? Okay, there we go. Listen to this. Throughout Trump's life, he has embodied every national fascination: money and greed in the 80s, sex in the 90s, reality in the 2000s, social media in the 2010s. Why wouldn't we deserve him now? I mean, the gist of the article is this guy's a reflection of the country. You might not want to admit that, but he is.